All right. Department of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem. You know, she's the one who ended her little puppy because it wasn't a good farm dog. If there's ever a moment in human history where you should not be posing for an image that's going to cause a lot of people to say, what is this? Okay, so you have the Department of Homeland Security using the prisoners in El Salvador as a prop for an official government video. Now, let's be very clear here, okay? This is extremely uncomfortable to watch. It's extremely disturbing, and yes, I do understand that that a lot of the crisis in El Salvador, there is a huge criminal underground organization there. But perception drives reality, and something tells me that things are going to get worse with the migrant crisis here in this country and the way people are being deported. So I want to pull up this video. I'll play in its full entirety. When I say prepare yourselves, prepare yourselves.
Here at CCOT today and visiting this facility. And first of all, I want to thank El Salvador and their president for their partnership with the United States of America to bring our terrorists here and to incarcerate them and have consequences for the violence that they have perpetuated in our communities. I also want everybody to know, if you come to our country illegally, this is one of the consequences you could face. First of all, do not come to our country illegally. You will be removed and you will be prosecuted. But know that this facility is one of the tools in our toolkit that we will use if you commit crimes against the American people. Here at CCOT.
Okay, so there is a situation, and I could see it being played out where somebody is maybe misidentified and wrongly convicted. The system isn't perfect, my lovelies. And this is how we get a lot of problems, because I've seen my fair share of documentaries of the prisons in El Salvador, and it's not good. Believe you me, it's not good. And I want to pull up this video here from Glenn Greenwald. So let's play it.
We reported previously last week on the controversy surrounding the fact that the Trump administration during the campaign promised to mass deport illegal people in the United States illegally. And deportations typically means, in fact, always means picking people up who are in your country illegally and sending them back to their country of origin. They get a very quick hearing in basically a quasi court, a deportation court inside the Justice Department, as long as the government can show they don't have the legal papers to be in the United States and the person can't show they have the legal documents, the deportation is approved and they get sent back to their home country. And the Trump administration is doing some of that, not nearly at the levels promised, but they're doing some of it. But they're doing something much, much different, which is that they're picking people up, primarily Venezuelans up until now, and they're not sending them back to Venezuela. They're sending them to a third country that these people have nothing to do with, that they're not citizens of, that in most, if not all cases, they've never visited, which is El Salvador. And the United States government is paying the government of El Salvador not to accept them, but to incarcerate them in one of the most horrific prisons that exist in the world, to film them being humiliated and dehumanized, all based on the accusation that the Trump administration refuses to prove that these people are members of a violent gang, Tren de Aragua, based on the invocation of war powers that has only been used 3 times previously in actual wars: the war in 1812, the War of 1812, World War I, World War II. But even then, the people who were ordered under the Alien Enemies Act to be deported got a hearing. And yet the Trump administration is sending these people, including people who have obviously compelling cases that they're not part of this gang, that they've been mistaken for gang members, just like the U.S. told us during Guantanamo, the war on terror, that only the worst of the worst were there. And it turned out many of the people there had nothing to do with terrorism. They were innocent. They were part of mistaken identity, any number of reasons why. That's what happens when you don't give people due process. You imprison people unjustly.
I want to pause here because right now, This has also been shared. Human rights groups rebuke Kristi Noem's visit to El Salvador prison as political theater. So, human rights organizations on Thursday denounced the visit by U.S. Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, to the notorious prison in El Salvador that's holding hundreds of Venezuelans deported from the U.S. earlier this month without a hearing, calling her actions political theater. Critics condemn Noem's visit as just the latest example of Trump's administration aimed to spread fear among immigrant communities, as a cabinet member stood in a baseball hat in front of a line of caged men, bare from the waist up. Noem visited a so-called CCOT, a terrorism confinement center, an infamous maximum security prison. The prison was built in 2022 during a brutal government crackdown on organized crime. It's where nearly 300 migrants previously in the U.S. custody were recently expelled and are currently detained. So, how do we look at this horrific story here? First of all, a due process must take place. And I understand that there's another side to this, and that is you can thank the Biden-Harris administration and so many people that were fighting for the sanctuary cities to be a thing. See, what was set up was false promises and was the idea and concept that somehow Biden and later on Kamala were somehow going to win. This was never the case. You see, the problem that the Democrats did, and now they are completely impotent, and even if they did have the numbers, won't do anything about, is that this is how the prison industrial complex continues to work. And yes, it has its tentacles wrapped around a lot of businesses and a lot of countries. And in turn, with many of these Venezuelans who were sent to El Salvador, they have no business in El Salvador. They right now have been accused of being violent gang members, despite family members of several men asserting that they are not. So great. There hasn't been a process to determine, is this a bad person or not? Democrats, this is something you also have to take responsibility for. Yes, Trump was saying he was going to do this, and he's going to do it. And when we covered this, especially last month in February, where you had Tom Homan and Dr. Phil in Chicago rounding up migrants, how do you know me? How do you know me? I mean, Homan, what was he saying afterwards? That he wanted to expand the list besides violent criminals, but also go after the non-violent ones as well. I want to continue playing a little bit more of this video from, again, Glenn Greenwald, who's one of the Dauntless Few.
And a federal district court judge ordered that this stop, that no detainees be delivered to El Salvador without first getting a hearing. And the Trump administration rushed to move them there, brought 237 of them there, refused to turn the plane around. And a lot of Trump supporters have been complaining, oh, this is just a single federal judge. Who is he to order the president to stop some policy based on his belief that it's unconstitutional or illegal, even though, as we showed you on Monday night, that's how our system works. Conservatives have often got injunctions from single district court judges to stop Biden policy, to stop Obama policy, to stop Clinton policy. But the DOJ appealed that injunction, so it's not before just a single district judge now. It's before the U.S. Court of Appeals, which is the highest appellate court in the country. It's right below the Supreme Court in terms of prestige. And they held an oral argument on Monday, and we played a lot of that for you, or some of it, in which we showed you how antagonistic, how adversarial, how aggressive the judges on the panel were being toward the Trump Justice Department's arguments about why they have the legal authority to do this, and made quite clear that it's extremely likely that the appellate court would uphold that injunction, so that now it's not just a single federal court judge, it's the most prestigious appellate court in the country, right below the Supreme Court, that's doing so. And the three judges were an Obama appointee, a George H.W. Bush appointee, and a Trump appointee. And the decision that they issued today was a 2-1 decision, which upheld this injunction that the federal district court issued, ordered the Trump administration not to deport anyone else back to El Salvador, at least not without hearings. And even the judge in dissent, the Trump judge, emphasized that every single illegal alien, people inside the United States illegally, that the Trump administration proposes to send to a prison in a foreign country, has a right to a habeas corpus hearing, to an opportunity to prove that he's being unjustly accused. The only reason he dissented was he said that the case should have been brought where they were detained and not in Washington.
I think it's also important to, because I want to share this with you guys in regards to some of the notes that I have here. So what has not been covered too much by the mainstream media is that early this month, Donald Trump, so early in March, Donald Trump, his administration, invoked something called the Aliens Enemy Act. And so it's a wartime provision. Great. It's wartime that allows the executive to detain and deport people coming from an enemy nation. So I guess Venezuela is an enemy. Despite a federal judge who I want to add in here blocked this invocation, the U.S. planes landed in El Salvador and they carried more than 250 to 300 men, mostly who are from Venezuela, and were put in that El Salvadorian prison, in which we have the wonderful, incredible Kristi Noem standing before right here, right now.
Here at CCOT today and visiting this facility. And first of all, I want to thank El Salvador and their president for their partnership with the United States of America to bring our terrorists here and to incarcerate them and have consequences for the violence that they have perpetuated in our communities. I also want everybody to know, if you come to our country illegally, this is one of the consequences you could face. First of all, do not come to our country illegally. You will be removed and you will be prosecuted. But know that this facility is one of the tools in our toolkit that we will use if you commit crimes against the American people.
Now, this is rather unprecedented because no country has ever been used as a use of or to detain migrants from a third country is unprecedented. So, like, they're using a maximum security prison to do all this. Though somehow I'm horrifyingly reminded of a place called Gitmo. But anyways, this facility holds about 40,000 people, and that's only 30% of the current prison population. The rest of the population is located in other centers. And it's been called out that torture and other human rights violations have been documented. So in CCOT, for those 250 men who were deported from the USA, who are from Venezuela, are in this facility. It's not safe. Definitely not that. There's, of course, prison yard and prison guard politics that will be in play. And unfortunately, it looks like it's only going to intensify as this administration has made it clear that they are going to be cracking down on sanctuary cities, and no mayor, I don't care who they are, Mayor Brandon Johnson or anybody else, is going to have the stones to stand up to Trump and his administration. When we saw first of all, Tom Homan and then Dr. Phil, how do you know me, come to Chicago, Johnson and his administration were impotent and completely weak, as I knew they would be. As Mayor Brandon Johnson has done nothing to really improve the migrants, especially living their lives living here in this city. All what it's done is led to a further powder keg that's going to cost him potentially the city election of 2027. We'll see what happens with that. I want to continue a little bit more of this video from Glenn Greenwald. One of the dauntless few was actually doing the good work.
But on the substance of whether they have a due process right, the dissenting judge agreed. There was essentially 3-0 on that question. Here you see the ruling. It says, it is further ordered that the emergency motions for stay be denied. Separate concurring judgments of Judge Henderson, that's the Bush 41 judge, and Judge Millett, the Obama judge, and a dissenting statement of Judge Walker are attached. And this was from the ruling of Judge Henderson, the Bush 41 judge who ruled against the Trump DOJ. She wrote, quote, the Alien Enemies Act, AEA, contains two provisions, a conditional clause and an operative clause. The conditional clause limits the AEA's substantive authority to conflicts between the United States and a foreign power. Specifically, there must, quote, be, quote, there must be, one, a declared war between the United States and any foreign nation or government, or two, an invasion of predatory incursion perpetrated, attempted, or threatened against the territory of the United States by any foreign nation or government, and three, a presidential public proclamation of the event. She went on, a central limit to this power is the act's conditional clause that the United States be at war or under invasion or predatory incursion. And she talked about how the only times it had ever been enacted was during traditional wars, the War of 1812, World War I, World War II, how the founders enacted it specifically to confront a possible war, then the quasi-war that they ended up fighting with the French. And everything in the record of this law was that it needed to be invoked or needed to be available solely in the case of an actual war. And she went on to say that she's not issuing an opinion about whether or not there can be an invasion, but that the likelihood of victory is with the plaintiffs because she doesn't believe the AEA is applicable to fighting a few hundred members of a violent gang. That's not what the Alien Enemies Act is for. And that's an important limitation on the law because this law gives the president enormous powers, very extraordinary powers. And that's why we have to be very careful about the president's ability to just declare war. Otherwise, the Constitution has no purpose. Bush and Cheney claimed war powers because they were fighting the war on terror. Any president could just say, we're at war, and now I have the ability to do everything. But Judge Millett, the Obama judge, emphasized that even under the AEA, the people who are ordered by the president deported always have a due process right and always did, even the people accused of being Nazi sympathizers in World War II. Here's what she wrote. Judicial review has always been available to non-citizens detained or removed under the AEA. During the War of 1812, Chief Justice John Marshall and Federal District Judge St. George Tucker ordered a British subject released because the local marshal had acted beyond his delegated authority by detaining the plaintiff without proper notice. And then she cites the histories of these cases in which even people who are detained under these laws have been given due process. She then went on, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, we can go on. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court later agreed with the Chief Justice that those subject to the AEA are entitled to judicial review. And she cited a 1813 case from the Pennsylvania Supreme Court that during the war in 1812, people ordered by the president removed have a right to a hearing to contest the accusations against them that they are really a threat. The judge went on, quote, these early cases set a precedent followed during the 20th century. Review was available during World War I, cites a 1919 case in a federal district judge, as well as World War II, citing a U.S. Supreme Court ruling in 1948 that stated, quote, hearings are utilized by the executive to secure an informed basis for the exercise of summary power.
So to pause here, what we have is a legal system that is not working because the Trump administration is taking their own executive powers and doing whatever they want. Now, many are probably wondering, well, what about Congress? What about Congress? Well, first of all, what do you expect Congress to do? Right now, this current Congress is a Republican-held Senate and House. They got all the cards. After November 5th, when the Democrats got stuck up the wazoo, and not to mention, even if the Democrats did control one chamber or it was 50-50, or, maybe they had a majority in the House and Senate, you do realize that the Democrats weren't going to be raising up a stink about it because Trump was still going to execute his executive powers. Because there's a thing called blue dog Democrats, conservative Democrats. The Democrat Party as a whole being a united party, we're never going to be that la resistance. And they're not going to be the la resistance because this is the same Democrat Party under the Biden-Harris administration that still turned a blind eye to the migrant crisis. They're never going to do anything. And the kids were still in cages when Biden and Kamala were in office. But it does call into question Congress. Where is your role in this? Because this is an obscene amount of powers. And you could thank the Bush-Cheney administration for setting the precedent of what a president can do, what a president is capable of doing, and the powers of the executive branch. I'm gonna let you on a little shocker here. From 2001, 2008, you think the Democrats gave any much of a pushback against Bush Jr. and Cheney? The answer is no, because you all remember it, because that's why we got Obama, that's why we got Trump, that's why we got Biden, that's why we got Trump again. Congress is too busy looking at their financial portfolios. They got a financial killing to make. But real quick, the day before yesterday on Wednesday, A federal appeals court panel did keep or kept in place a lower court order temporarily barring the Trump administration from deporting more migrants under the Alien Enemies Act. But that's only going to go so far, because if Trump's going to want something done, he doesn't care. I mean, see, the difference between Trump and Democratic and Republican presidents before is that at least put on the facade of, okay, well, we can't do this. No. Trump doesn't care about that because of the actions of other previous presidents. Now, they put on the act of caring about the rule of law and order, but there was always that concern, the criticism towards Bush Jr., Obama, and that is the powers that they're using and the president they're saying or laying out could be used by somebody who will use that executive power in horrific ways. I want to pull up the rest of this video.
She went on, quote, "Indeed, during World War II, a former member of the Nazi Party not only received a hearing on his eligibility for removal, but also had his case heard by the Supreme Court. And she ruled that this removal is unconstitutional because, as the Supreme Court ruled, even for detainees in Guantanamo, you cannot consign people to prison, even if they're in your country illegally, even if they're not citizens. You cannot put people in prison based on an allegation that they're terrorists, they're involved in a terrorist organization, that they're a violent member of a violent drug gang, without giving the accused, the person you want to put in prison, the opportunity to demonstrate that the accusations are false, that they've gotten the wrong person, or to present evidence that convinces a court that they've been wrongly accused. This is foundational to the American system, even in wartime. Now, what's interesting is the Trump-appointed judge, Judge Walker, did dissent. But as I said, he dissented mostly on the grounds of where the case was brought. He said it shouldn't have been brought in Washington, but in Texas. You have to bring it in the place where the people are detained, not where the government officials are. And in his dissent, he said this, quote, "The two sides of this case agree on very little. But what is at this point uncontested is that, quote, individuals identified as alien enemies may challenge that status in a habeas petition." And as I said, he went on to say that should have been brought in Texas, not Washington. Therefore, he would have dismissed the case. He also said that there's delicate diplomacy, according to the government, going on between Venezuela and El Salvador and the United States, and that a ruling like this might disrupt those diplomatic relations, and therefore the equities are on the side of lifting the injunction. But all three of these judges agreed with the court point that you cannot send people to an unrelated country based on an accusation that you haven't proven or given them an opportunity to contest. And as we've gone over, there's 150 years Supreme Court history that says that the Bill of Rights is not a list of protections given solely to a small group of people called American citizens. It is intended to be a constraint on what the US government does and can do with respect to everyone under their control. If the Trump administration wants to do mass deportation, they convinced Americans to vote for that. Polls show people favor that. And if they were deporting people back to their home country, none of this would be an issue. But when you change that to something far more radical, sending people based on interpretations of their tattoos or the flimsiest evidence that you haven't even presented to a court, and you accuse people of being violent criminals and send them to a prison designed to be one of the worst and most destructive and humiliating and dehumanizing prisons in the entire world, where the El Salvadorian government has said they may never leave, they may be here for life. Not just basic human rights, but our Constitution, our laws, our precedent, as all three judges agreed, including the Trump-appointed judge, require that they be given an opportunity to contest the charges against them. This should not even be controversial. And yet, it has become such, because if you sufficiently dehumanize people, and this is what we saw in the war on terror, if the government just labels them terrorists without proving it, even if it's wrong, enough people will say, oh, these people are animals. They're not even humans. They deserve no rights. Kill them, torture them, kidnap them, put them in prison for life. They don't need a trial. And that is always what the founders feared most, was that the government would raise the fear level sufficiently so that people would give away their own liberties. Remember Benjamin Franklin? and this isn't apocryphal, this is documented, when he left the Constitutional Convention, was asked by a woman, what is it that you did in there? And he said, we created a republic if you can keep it.
If. The key word, if you can keep it. It's easy for a lot of us to get emotional and angry, especially how the Democrats and, yes, in turn, Trump and then Biden, Obama and everyone else, how they handled this migrant crisis. And the reason why we have a migrant crisis is again, because of coups and regime change wars and this ridiculous war on drugs. And who has benefited from the prison industrial complex, military industrial complex, big oil, because there's all sorts of fancy resources in Central and South America. Now, maybe I'm a dreamer, but perhaps maybe diplomacy, diplomatic communications between different governments can lead to better trade relations and cultural exchange. But no. And so a rational person living in these environments will try and adapt in an irrational environment. You have a war on drugs. You have people who then get intertwined and interconnected to these cartels. You have a dictatorship. You have a civil war happening. And a rational person is going to want to escape either with themselves, or if they got family, they want to make sure that their family members are out of that war zone, or either that not under the thumb of a cartel drug lord. These are things that are real realities to people. And yes, of course, there are bad people who do cross the border, who do commit crimes. This is very clear. I'm not going to sugarcoat a picture like this, but when you have people who are then detained, and yes, they are illegal immigrants, but they're being accused of crimes they didn't do, and then they go to another country's prison that has a horrific track record, and they're going to be there for the rest of their lives, I have to wonder, okay, well, the Trump administration is doing this to the migrants, especially illegal migrants. What comes next? Who's going to get the knock at the door? Political police. There's consequences and actions that will take place and will happen. And unfortunately, there are many people who just are not invested or interested in this. But this is how things get progressively worse. There is a thing called process. There's a thing called innocent before. Innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Yes, even if they're migrants, look, humanely, treat people humanely, okay? If they didn't do the crime, they shouldn't be going to an El Salvadorian prison where its track record isn't all that squeaky clean. This is how nightmares get created.